May the 12th. Got a single copy of the Blackfriars Bi-Weekly News. There was a short list of several names they had omitted, but the stupid people had mentioned our names as Mr. and Mrs. C. Porter. Most annoying. Wrote again, and I took particular care to write our name in capital letters, P-O-O-T-E-R, so that there should be no possible mistake this time. May the 16th. Absolutely disgusted on opening the Blackfriars Bi-Weekly News of today to find the following paragraph. We have received 2 letters from Mr. and Mrs. Charles Pewter requesting us to announce the important fact that they were at the Mansion House ball. I tore up the paper and threw it in the wastepaper basket. My time is far too valuable to bother about such trifles. May the 21st. The last week or 10 days terribly dull, Carrie being away at Mrs. James's at Sutton. Cummings also away. Going, I presume, is still offended with me for black without asking him. May the 22nd. Purchased a new stick mounted with silver, which cost 7 6 pence. Shall tell Carrie 5 shillings. And sent it round with a nice note to Going. May 23rd. Received a strange note from Going. He said, "Offended? Not a bit, my boy. I thought you were offended with me for losing my temper. Besides, I found, after all, it was not my poor uncle's stick you'd painted. It was only a shilling thing I bought at a tobacconist's. However, I'm much obliged to you for your handsome present all the same." May 24th. Carrie back. Hurrah! She looks wonderfully well, except that the sun has caught her nose. June the 1st. The last week has been like old times. Carrie being back and Going and Cummings called every evening nearly. Twice we sat out in the garden quite late. This evening we were like a pack of children and played Consequences. It was a good game. June the 2nd. Consequences again this evening. Not quite so successful as last night. Going having several times overstepped the limits of good taste. June the 7th. A dreadful annoyance. Met Mr. Franching, who lives at Peckham, and who is a great swell in his way. I ventured to ask him to come home to meat tea and take pot luck. I did not think he would accept such a humble invitation, but he did, saying in a most friendly way he would rather peck with us than by himself. I said, we'd better get into this blue bus. He replied, "No blue bussing for me. Enough of the blues lately. I lost a cool thou over the copper scare. Step in here." We drove up home in style in a hansom cab, and I knocked 3 times at the front door without getting an answer. I saw Carrie through the panels of ground glass, with stars, rushing upstairs. I told Mr. Franching to wait at the door while I went round to the side. There I saw the grocer's boy actually picking off the paint on the door, which had formed into blisters. No time to reprove him, so went round and effected an entrance through the kitchen window. I let in Mr. Franching and showed him into the drawing-room. I went upstairs to Carrie, who was changing her dress, and told her that I'd persuaded Mr. Franching to come home. She replied, "How can you do such a thing? You know it's Sarah's holiday, and there's not a thing in the house, the cold mutton having turned with the hot weather." Eventually Carrie, like a good creature as she is, slipped down, washed up the teacups, and laid the cloth. And I gave Franching our views of Japan to look at, while I ran round to the butcher's to get 3 chops. July the 30th. At the office I was sent for by Mr. Perkup, who said he was very sorry, but I should have to take my annual holidays from next Saturday. Franching called at the office and asked me to dine at his club, the Constitutional. Fearing disagreeables at home, I sent a telegram to Carrie, telling her I was going out to dine and she was not to sit up. Bought a little silver bangle for Carrie. July the 31st. Carrie was very pleased with the bangle, which I left with an affectionate note on her dressing table last night before going to bed. I told Carrie we should have to start for our holiday next Saturday. She replied quite happily that she did not mind, except that the weather was so bad. I said to Carrie, "I don't think we can do better than good old Broadstairs." Carrie, not only to my astonishment, raised an objection to Broadstairs for the first time, but begged me not to use the expression good old. Hearing my bus pass the window, I was obliged to rush out of the house without kissing Carrie as usual, and I shouted to her, I leave it to you to decide. On returning in the evening, Carrie said she thought, as time was so short, she had decided on Broadstairs, and had written to Mrs. Beck, Harbourview Terrace, for apartments. August the 1st. Ordered a new pair of trousers at Edwards's, and told them not to cut them so loose over the boot. The last pair being so loose, and also tight at the knee, looked like a sailor's, and I heard Pitt, that objectionable youth at the office, call out "hornpipe" as I passed his desk. Carrie has ordered a pink Garibaldi and blue serge skirt, which I always think looks so pretty at the seaside. In the evening she trimmed herself a little sailor hat, while I read to her The Exchange and Mart. August the 2nd. Mrs. Beck wrote to say we could have our usual rooms at Broadstairs. That's off our mind. Bought a coloured shirt and a pair of tan-coloured boots, which I see many of the swell clerks wearing in the city, and here are all the go. August 3rd. A beautiful day. Looking forward to tomorrow. Carrie bought a parasol about 5 feet long. I told her it was ridiculous. She said Mrs. James of Sutton has one twice as long, so the matter dropped. I bought a capital hat for hot weather at the seaside. I don't know what it's called, but it is in the shape of the helmet worn in India, only made of straw. Spent the evening packing. August 4th. The first post brought a nice letter from our dear son, Willie, acknowledging a trifling present which Carrie sent him the day before yesterday, being his 20th birthday. To our utter amazement, he turned up himself in the afternoon, having journeyed all the way from Oldham. He said he'd got leave from the bank, and as Monday was a holiday, he thought he would give us a little surprise. August the 5th, Sunday. We have not seen Willie since last Christmas, and are pleased to notice what a fine young man he has grown. One would scarcely believe he was Carrie's son. He looks more like a younger brother. I rather disapprove of his wearing a check suit on Sunday, and I think he ought to have gone to church this morning, but he said he was tired after yesterday's journey, so I refrained from any remark on the subject. We had a bottle of port for dinner and drank dear Willie's health. He said, "Oh, by the by, did I tell you I've cut my first name, William, and taken the second name, Lupin? In fact, I'm only known at Oldham as Lupin Pooter. If you were to Willie me there, they wouldn't know what you meant." Of course, Lupin being a purely family name, Carrie was delighted, and began by giving a long history of the Lupins. I ventured to say that I thought William a nice, simple name, and reminded him he was christened after his uncle William, who was much respected in the city. Willie, in a manner which I did not much care for, said sneeringly, "Oh, I know all about that. Good old Bill," and helped himself to a third glass of port. Carrie objected strongly to my saying good old, but she made no remark when Willie used the double adjective. I said nothing, but looked at her, which meant more. I said, "My dear Willie, I hope you are happy with your colleagues at the bank?" And he replied, "Lupin, if you please. And with respect to the bank, there's not a clerk who is a gentleman, and the boss is a cad." I felt so shocked I could say nothing. August 6th, bank holiday. As there was no sign of Lupin moving at 9 o'clock, I knocked at his door and said we usually breakfasted at 8:30, and asked how long would he be. Lupin replied that he'd had a lively time of it, first with the train shaking the house all night, and then with the sun streaming in through the window in his eyes and giving him a cracking headache. Carrie came up and asked if he would like some breakfast sent up, and he said he could do with a cup of tea and didn't want anything to eat. Lupin not having come down, I went up again at 1:30 and said we dined at 2. He never came down till 2:45. I said, "We've not seen much of you, and you'll have to return by the 5:30 train. Therefore you'll have to leave in an hour, unless you go by the midnight mail." He said, "Look here, Governor, no use beating about the bush. I've tendered my resignation at the bank." For a moment I could not speak. When my speech came again, I said, "How dare you take such a serious step without consulting me? Don't answer me, sir. You will sit down immediately, and write a note at my dictation withdrawing your resignation and amply apologizing for your thoughtlessness. Imagine my dismay when he replied with a loud guffaw, "Oh, it's no use. If you want the good old truth, I've got the chuck." August the 7th. Mr. Perkupp has given me leave to postpone my holiday a week. This will give us an opportunity of trying to find an appointment for Willie before we go. The ambition of my life would be to get him into Mr. Perkupp's firm. August the 11th. Although it is a serious matter having our boy Lupin on our hands, still it is satisfactory to know he was asked to resign from the bank simply because he took no interest in his work and always arrived an hour, sometimes 2 hours, late. August 13th. Hurrah! At Broadstairs. Very nice apartments near the station. The landlady had a nice 5 o'clock dinner and tea ready, which we all enjoyed. Though Lupin seemed fastidious because there happened to be a fly in the butter. It was very wet in the evening, for which I was thankful, as it was a good excuse for going to bed early. Lupin said he would sit up and read a bit. August the 14th. I was a little annoyed to find Lupin, instead of reading last night, had gone to a common sort of entertainment given at the assembly rooms. Rained all day, hard, but Lupin would go out. August the 15th. Cleared up a bit, so we all took the train to Margate, and the first person we met on the jetty was going. I said, "Hello, thought you'd gone to Barmouth with your Birmingham friends." He said, "Yes, but young Peter Lawrence was so ill, they postponed their visit, so I came down here." You know the Cummingses are here too. August the 18th. Going and Cummings walked over to arrange an evening at Margate. It being wet, Going asked Cummings to accompany him to the hotel and have a game of billiards, knowing I never play, and in fact disapprove of the game. Cummings said he must hasten back to Margate, whereupon Lupin, to my horror, said, "I'll give you a game, Going. 100 up. Walk round the cloth will give me an appetite for dinner." August the 19th, Sunday. I was about to read Lupin a sermon on smoking, which he indulges in violently, and billiards, but he put on his hat and walked out. Carrie then read me a long sermon on the palpable inadvisability of treating Lupin as if he were a mere child. I felt she was somewhat right, so in the evening I offered him a cigar. He seemed pleased, but after a few whiffs said, "This is a good old tuppenny. Try one of mine." And he handed me a cigar as long as it was strong, which is saying a good deal. August the 20th. I'm glad our last day at the seaside was fine, though clouded overhead. We went over to Cummings at Margate in the evening, and as it was cold, we stayed in and played games, Going, as usual, overstepping the mark. He suggested we should play cutlets, a game we'd never heard of. He sat on a chair and asked Carrie to sit on his lap, an invitation which dear Carrie rightly declined. After some species of wrangling, I sat on Going's knees and Carrie sat on the edge of mine. Lupin sat on the edge of Carrie's lap, and then Cummings on Lupin's and Mrs. Cummings on her husband's. We looked very ridiculous and laughed a good deal. August the 22nd. Home, sweet home again. Phipps, James and Company write to say that they are sorry they have no vacancy among their staff of clerks for Lupin. August the 23rd. I bought a pair of Stack's heads made of plaster of Paris and coloured brown. They would look just the thing for our little hall and give it style. The heads are excellent imitations. Poolers and Smith are sorry they have nothing to offer Lupin. August the 24th. Simply to please Lupin and make things cheerful for him, as he is a little down, Carrie invited Mrs. James to come up from Sutton and spend 2 or 3 days with us. We've not said a word to Lupin, but mean to keep it as a surprise. August the 25th. Mrs. James of Sutton arrived in the afternoon, bringing with her an enormous bunch of wild flowers. The more I see of Mrs. James, the nicer I think she is, and she's devoted to Carrie. Lupin said he was not a bit surprised at Mrs. James's visit, but was surprised at her.